Welcome to the Oral History Podcast, which features stories from the oral history website voicesofoklahoma.com, where Oklahomans have given generously of their time to tell their life story for present-day listeners and for the generations to come. Our entire collection is available at voicesofoklahoma.com. By subscribing to our podcast, you will be notified of new Oklahoma oral history podcasts. So now listen to another interesting storyteller from voicesofoklahoma.com.
St. John Medical Center's Sister Mary Therese Gottschalk was born in 1931 in a tiny village in Bavaria, Germany, the second of 14 children. You are about to hear Sister Therese tell her story of a young girl in Germany during World War II, her call to the ministry, her arrival in the United States, and her life dedicated to healthcare and related ministries to the Tulsa community. She became more than a spiritual leader, becoming the assistant administrator of St. John's Hospital and School of Nursing in 1970 and named president in 1974, then becoming chief executive officer of St. John Health System in 1982. Under her leadership, the St. John Health System has grown into a fully integrated healthcare system serving Northeast Oklahoma, Southeast Kansas, and Northwest Arkansas. This remarkable story from Bavaria to Tulsa is made possible by the generous funding of our foundation underwriters and heard on voicesofoklahoma.com.
My name is John Erling. Today's date is July 29th, 2010.
I'm Sister Mary Therese Gottschalk. At the present time, I am still the CEO of the St. John Health System. I'm born June 21st, 1931, and so I am 79 years old, going on 80.
Where are we recording this interview?
At St. John Medical Center in my office.
And joining us in this interview is Richard Boone. Richard, maybe just a review how long you've been with the health system, when you started, and your present position here.
John, I joined St. John in April of 1984 as corporate VP of marketing for the system. I was appointed president of the foundation in 1990, which I still am, and I've been here 26 years.
Sister, let's go to when you were born and go way back then.
I was born in Germany in a village because my parents had a farm, and so I was born on the farm. And in Germany, you don't have so much single farms, you have villages. You have maybe 50 families or 50 people live in one village, and all our properties that we farm is outside.
Okay.
And so we go out from here every day to farm.
So you didn't necessarily live on the farmland. You lived in the village and then went out to your farmland.
Yeah.
Was that in Bavaria you were born?
I was born in Bavaria.
Located in the southeast portion of the country, I think.
Right. About 60 miles south of Munich and about 40 miles north of Munich and 40 miles south of Nuremberg, between Nuremberg and Munich.
Munich is the capital. It hosted the 72 Olympic Games.
Yes.
And football World Cups and European track and field championships. Have you been back many times?
Yes, when I first came to the United States, I became a sister in Germany because we have a convent. I'm a Franciscan sister after Sorrowful Mother. That's our title. We have our main headquarters in Rome, but we have regions, and we call it provinces, in Germany, Austria, Italy, in the United States. We had 3. And so when the sisters were needed, right after the war, there were so many vocations, so we didn't need all the sisters in Germany, so some of us volunteered to come over to the United States.
Okay, and I'm going to bring that up again, but in Bavaria, Pope Benedict was born also in Bavaria.
Right.
In 1927.
Not too far from where we are.
Not far from where you lived.
Well, 40 miles or so.
Yeah. He served as a professor of theology at various universities. Did you ever know of him?
No, because I came over in 1953, so I would not have known that much of him.
Right. Let's talk about your mother and your father and maybe some remembrances of them. Your mother's name?
My mother's maiden name was Sabina Dietz, and my father, of course, is Johann, John.
Did you come from a large family?
We grew up in a family of 14. And we had 2 brothers die in a young age, in infancy.
14. Now, where do you come in this order?
Second oldest.
Second oldest?
I have a sister that was 5 years older than I am. After me, there's one every year, seems like.
Maybe then we know why you get along with everybody. You learned how to in your huge family.
Right. In a family as huge as ours, the children discipline each other, you know.
Right.
Mother and father don't have a lot to do.
What did your father do to support that larger family?
We had a farm, and he just worked the farm, you know. My mother helped on the farm, too, you know, especially in the afternoons.
And then he had plenty of help.
Thank God I have a sister older than I, so she was the one that had to help on the farm. Because I wasn't a farm person. I was never good at it.
But you probably had some chores to do, right?
I was supposed to always help my mother in the house. Babysitting, take care of the children,
right.
A lot of things. Get everything ready, you know. She taught me how to cook, you know, and so when she wasn't available, I could do some of that.
Your family then, were they active in the Catholic Church?
Yes, because, see, in the village where I was, in the area where I was, everybody was Catholic. We had other villages where everybody was Lutheran. The reason it was organized this way was because past 50, 100 years, we didn't have cars. So we had our own school, our own church, and everything kind of centered around school, church, and maybe a store, a food store or something that we could buy things from. That's the way we lived.
And so the social activity and everything was all centered really around the church in your community.
The social thing was more like something like a bar, but it wasn't exactly a bar, you know. The men go to play cards and drink beer and eat pretzels, you know. So the women had to stay home more than men.
You committed yourself to the church, and that was your profession. Did any of your other siblings do the same?
No. I'm the only one.
Your education then, elementary school obviously, right there.
What we had in Germany was vocational school. That came after the elementary school. So we had 3 years we went to vocational school, 1 or 2 days a week. And the rest of the time we worked in the profession, whatever somebody wanted to do, you know.
Was that after elementary? Mm-hmm. Was it kind of like high school?
It was equivalent to high school. It prepared you for what you wanted to do. For instance, all my brothers, they'd be either carpenter, an electrician. Since I have many brothers, so everyone had a different trade. So we could build our own houses.
What vocation did you choose then at that time?
At that time, just household.
So that training was for
3 years.
3 years.
And we had to go to school still 1 day a week. And by the way, they still have to do this system where they have vocational schools. Because not everybody goes on to a higher education.
By the way, your siblings, most of them are still living?
Within the last 10 years, I actually lost 4 siblings. 3 brothers who died of cancer, and 1 sister.
So then you have 5 remaining?
With me, there's still 5 girls and 5 brothers.
Did any of them make it over here to the United States to visit you here?
Yes, they did come a few times to visit. But it's more the nephews and nieces that come now.
Let me take you back to when you were a child in the house. Any memories of what you did as kids, what you might have done for fun or entertainment, games you might have played?
Well, we had to make up our own entertainment. We had no TV. Maybe we have the radio, you know, we could listen to in the evening, but otherwise we just played with whatever we had. We had swings. In winter, you know, we had skis and sleds and things like that. We didn't miss anything, you know.
And you didn't go wanting for anything either, did you? You always had enough as a family, a large family like that.
We had our girlfriends and boyfriends when you got older.
Right.
But we did a lot of walking, and especially weekends, you know, Sunday.
When did you begin to learn English?
After I came over here.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So that was basically the 30s. In 1939, 40 and 41, you were 8, 9, and 10 years old. Were you aware of war in your country? In 1938, Germany mobilized its military and then they take over Czechoslovakia. Were you aware of any of this?
I was aware of one day, and that was the day when Germany declared the war with Poland, I believe. It was a gloomy day. Seems like it must have been even raining. And everybody in the house had a gloomy kind of attitude. That's all that I remember very keenly,
How did you know that? Come on the radio? Or?
The radio, probably, And of course, we had a newspaper, but radio, because we already heard it early in the morning, from what I remember.
That was in September of 1939. You had fears then? Well, what's going to happen to us now since you invaded another country?
Fears of war, because most of the people older than I am lived through World War I, and they haven't forgotten World War I. We still suffer from the consequences of that. So, yes, everybody was kind of scared of war.
Because in that same month, then, Britain, France, Australia, and New Zealand declared war on Germany. Since you listened to the radio, do you remember hearing Hitler speaking on the radio?
Yeah. I remember having heard him speak. You heard Hitler speak later on, too. He had this unique way of speaking,
Well, he was an outstanding public speaker. You've got to give him credit for that. So you do remember hearing him?
Oh, yeah. Since I'm over here, you see a movie, he's very unique, I believe he had a unique way of convincing people that he's right and to do what he wanted them to do. He was just very forceful, So I always resented because he wasn't German.
He wasn't German?
Not from birth. He was Austrian.
He was Austrian? Mm-hmm. He tried to hide that, didn't he?
Most probably because no one ever talked about it much. But his history is that he came from Russia. As a teenager, came over to Germany, and he was still young. And that's when he started convincing everyone about the war, Gradually he started out and got elected.
So you're awfully young here. Then when Pearl Harbor happens in 1941, you were just 10 years old. Do you remember anything about hearing about that?
No. I don't remember that much from the war. I remember people being drafted from the village that we knew. First they all went to war, and then every few months somebody, just like now, a man being killed over in the Middle East, The news came, so-and-so was killed, and we had services for them. This is about all I remember till later on, the last year of the war. I remember that more distinctly, which was in 1945.
Right, and then you would have been 14, 15 years old, so it's understandable your memory would have been better then. Here in the United States, it was rationing and all. Did that happen in Germany?
Oh, definitely. There was a lot of rationing because the men, the soldiers, they needed to be fed, so you had to produce food. Being on a farm, you could have so many things of, like the hogs, chicken, or mostly meat, You had to tell how many you have of each. And they would tell you how many you can keep and butcher for yourself and how many you have to sell.
So what other animals would you have had?
Well, we had mostly hogs and we had cattle. From the cattle we had milk, but then you had to give the milk too, But we were a large family, so I should say we always had enough to eat. Maybe it wasn't always what children would like. There was no candy, for instance, during the war. Maybe at Christmas everybody got the rations for a little candy or something like that. Maybe just once a year. The same thing it was with fruit, especially oranges. We don't have oranges. We're too far north. You had to get them from the south. There were no citrus fruit available.
In school, did they talk about the war and the world and all that as you got older? Do you remember any of that?
We went to a school, our village school, and we had one teacher. He would actually teach all 7 grades. We were all in the same big room, and we studied with the little ones, 6-year-old, all the way up to 14 or 15. He managed them, He insisted on absolute silence. He started with the older ones, he gave an assignment, and then he started working with the little ones, because then the older ones, they finished with their lessons. We would certainly know that there was war, that there was shortages. It would be maybe announced. They went into France or Holland and all this, especially Russia. I think we knew more about Russia because here the Nazis were kind of clever. They tell the reasoning, for instance, to go into Russia because Ukraine was mostly German people who about 450 years earlier had migrated into Russia. And so he was just delivering Germans from wherever they were at the time, This is a kind of a thing that you heard from out of Hitler or out of Nazis. We had to greet Heil Hitler, This was our greeting because the Nazis insisted that our greeting should be Heil Hitler when you meet somebody. When you meet your friends, your relatives, or the people in the village, this is what we were taught. But we never did it, I mean, we had to do it sometime. But when our teacher came to school, the first thing was we say Heil Hitler. But when we were out in the street and meet our neighbors or anyone else, we wouldn't say that, even though we had to. I remember one occasion we were all out on the break, and a car came through with some Nazis, and we didn't greet him. And he went right to our school, and he was really rough on our teacher, because when we came back to school, we all got it too, He could at least have done it to strangers when they come in the hospital, because he got it for it, So I just remember it was stupid, Why cry Heil Hitler? I mean, after all, we said good morning, good noon, or whatever, but Heil Hitler just didn't make any sense. So we wouldn't do it because it made no sense.
And you're talking about when you were 8, 9, 10, 11 years old.
Yeah, we had to do it all during the war till the last day.
Do you remember hearing, as you got older and living in Germany, about the concentration camps?
No, never heard anything about it.
So you didn't know about that until you got over here?
After the war, because you heard about it. But my parents, with so many of us in the family, and children talk. When they hear something, they go out and talk. And so my parents never, ever talked about Hitler or anything like that, politics. They never talked about it. And I think that was partly because if they would say the wrong thing, children go and talk, and before you knew, somebody came to your house. That's where a lot of people got arrested because they were not careful when they talked about party. So because of that, it's quite different for those of us who lived in farms, in villages, maybe about 50 families. Some of them were a little bigger, some of them even smaller. Even though a lot of people were drafted and they were fighting in the war and they were killed in the war, there was never a whole lot of talking about it.
Do you recall neighbors near you that were arrested and taken away?
No. I must say nobody from our village was arrested. People over here that lived in cities, it was a different story, because in the city, people don't live as close-knit families. And they would say they had to be very, very careful that when you were in a restaurant, that you would never know who was sitting on the next table, because if you say the wrong thing, then you may get arrested. So they had to be very careful and not talk about politics.
Let's talk about when you were committing your life to the church, how that came about. There was a calling, I think, that you had difficulty rejecting. Can you tell us about that?
I was in an accident and ended up a patient in the hospital. In the hospital, there were sisters, they never mentioned anything that would you join our order or do something like that. But they gave me some literature to read. And when I got home, had some extra time, I was still off work for some weeks, I started reading this literature, and that's when I, for the first time, opened the book, and there was a prayer in the very front of the book. And I read it through, and it said something about how the church needed us to do some work for the church. And so that's when I felt this, oh my God, I'm not going to read this anymore. I might get a vocation, and I don't really want one. And so I never read another page of that, so I just put it aside and never read it. And from then on, that was probably early October, and from then on, I just never really had peace. Something always telling me this is something that I ought to pursue, and yet this is not something I want to do, so I was fighting it for myself to the point where I, by about Christmas, became just kind of didn't know. I mean, there was so much pressure, you should do that, and I didn't want to do that, and I was so restless at the time, and I just had to make up my mind one way or another so that I could have some peace again, So finally, I never forget that January 6th is always a day when I felt that I got my calling, to religious life, because in the Catholic Church we celebrate the feast of the Three Kings, and they got the calling, came, to Bethlehem, and so this is a feast of the calling, and that's when I decided today I'm going to make up my mind to decide what I'm going to do. So that's when I decided that I would do that. I would enter our community. Our sisters were in Aubenberg, Germany. They were not that far away. I knew some people that were sisters that had entered there. I talked to one of them who was home on vacation one time. Rather than to go to the community that operated the hospital where I was, I rather went to the community. I did the Sisters of the Sorrowful Mother. And basically I did that because there was another lady. She was actually somewhat older than I am. She had already signed up to join our community. So I just went with her.
So it was January 6th. What year was that?
52.
1952. And you were how old at that time?
I was 20 years old. 20.
So that day of January 6th, you told a certain person about it?
I did talk with my future companion, there with me. I talked to her, and she told me that she had signed up. And so we went to visit a sister from our order who was not even too far away, and they had a kindergarten there. So we went over to talk to her. This companion, she had a certain date already, February 1st. She was going to join February 1st. So I said, well, I also join same time. And she said, oh, no, you should wait, she said. She encouraged me to wait about 6 months to think about it somewhere. And I said, no, I couldn't think about it somewhere because probably someone is going to talk me out of it, I was sure. So I was very insistent that, that if I wait too long, I change my mind or something.
And on top of that, you were feeling a peace that you hadn't felt in a long time.
That came after that. See, once I made up my mind, finally said, this is what I'm going to do. People that found out afterwards, the people I knew in our village or in my life, they said, oh, surely you're not going to do that. No, you wouldn't do that. I kept thinking, why are they thinking that I couldn't do that? Why does anybody think, oh, no, you would never join a community?
Because of your family, you're the only one who committed their life to the church and became a nun or a priest. Isn't that true?
I'm the only one, yeah.
Right. And so that's why it seems so foreign to them, I suppose.
See, I was the second oldest. I must say that in our little town or village, what you call it, there was only a handful that had gone in the past. And after me, there was just an occasional one.
So then you joined the Sisters of the Sorrowful Mother.
I was in Aubenberg. Normally, you go to the steps, you become a candidate, and when you're there a few months, you became a postulant, and then you, after 6 months, become a novice. And that takes 2 years then, before you can make a vow to become a sister.
The Sisters of the Sorrowful Mother, tell us what their mission was.
In the United States, they had mostly healthcare. Healthcare was a very strong mission here. Over in Germany, it was more retirement centers and kindergarten and school. They operated or managed a few hospitals, but didn't own hospital at the time. So after I was there for a few months, they had asked me, besides being religious, we can't pray all the time, we also have to do our work, so they asked me what work I would want to do. And I told them at the time I wanted to be a nurse. That was okay. We had needed nurses.
Their first community was St. Francis Hospital in Wichita, Kansas.
Over here.
In 1889 in the United States.
Yeah. I became a novice. Then I could not go immediately with a group of sisters that left for the United States. I had to at least stay a year as a novice before they would allow me to come to the United States. So I stayed that year, and then after that 1 year, I still was interested to come to the U.S. Well, actually, I said I would go wherever they needed me, and that's where they sent me.
Then you came to the United States in 1953.
Right.
And you were 22.
I was 22 by then because it was in September, and I was 22 in June.
Where did you come into the United States?
I came in New York. I believe it was Kennedy Airport. That's where we landed, and then from there we flew to Milwaukee directly. That's where I stayed for the first 3 years in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, because I was then learning English, but at the same time go through what the sisters operated themselves was a high school in Milwaukee. So I joined the group that was going through high school.
And ultimately they were in Wisconsin, Minnesota, New Mexico, schools in Kansas, health resort in Danville, New Jersey. That's quite an order.
Still is. When our founders came over to the U.S., and that was in the late 1800s. It always kind of fascinates me when I read our history. The first, I believe, 11 years, she started 10 hospitals with nothing, absolutely nothing. An old building, an old practically hall or whatever. But every year she would start one. She started the one in Wichita, Kansas. There was a hospital before because it was a doctor that had a building and they donated it to this hospital. And there were the Mrs. Sisters at that hospital, but they had left. So that's when he kind of asked the sisters to take over this hospital. But there wasn't anything there. They still had to start with practically nothing. It was in the Midwest because there were plenty religious in the East and in the West Coast. But it was the Midwest, This was kind of not really that densely populated. So that's where we started, and every one of our hospitals from here up to northern Wisconsin, Minnesota even, they all had farms along with it because that's the only way they would get the food they needed for themselves and for the patients they had, So they operated farms, and I remember when I first went to the first hospital after I got all my education, it was New Mexico, we still had a farm there. We didn't have to farm, the sisters didn't. We had lay people farming it, but it was very important that we had a farm, so we had some food.
All along the way here, when you saw these sisters starting with nothing, were great role models for you, weren't they? Even to where you are today.
Yeah.
That you thought about what they did with nothing.
We did with nothing, and what a contrast, It's
Was that a big change for you? Were you homesick when you came here? And
the first year I was homesick. I was very homesick. And I thought to myself, well, maybe if I hadn't done it yet, maybe I wouldn't be so quick to say yes to come to the United States. However, at the same time, I have always said I would do whatever they asked me to do because that's when I would know I was doing God's will. If I did what I wanted to do, I felt it was my will doing it. And as a religious, when you vow obedience, you're supposed to do the will of God or not your own, so it was an important thing that to this day I can say, well, I always went wherever they sent me, and I was always happy. Yeah, I was never really disappointed,
No. You became a naturalized citizen then in 1958.
Yeah.
How was that for you? I mean, you still had feelings for your home country of Germany, and you have dual citizenship then, didn't you?
It's like this. It's another thing that you have to do in the process. When you're young, you make decisions without thinking a whole lot, Come to the U.S., it was easy. This decision was not hard to make. But afterwards, as you get older, maybe you wouldn't try this, fast to make a decision without thinking a whole lot about it. I had not talked to my parents. I hadn't talked to my family. I have already committed myself to come to the United States. It was okay. It was only after I was here that it was difficult, somewhat difficult. When you learn a language, and I couldn't converse in German anymore, and you have to converse just in English, a language that you're learning, it takes some time, You can read it, because when you read it, you have the words there. When you listen, you hear somebody talk. But when you talk yourself, you have to know the words. And you can only say what you know. And many times, there were times when you wanted to really express your feelings, the way you really feel, and you don't always have the words, so know the words how to express it. So you could never really say how you really felt. That took a few years till I had that.
So from the first time you came to Wisconsin, you were immersed in English, and you couldn't speak German.
No.
You had to start speaking English.
And there were German sisters there, but not among the younger group. I was with the younger group, and they were pretty much English, And besides, I have to learn the English, so they didn't really want me to talk the German.
Well, that had to be frustrating.
You just have to be more quiet. You can't say as much, so.
You ever talk to God and say, God, why did you make me do this?
Yeah. The first few years until I really did master the language. Then I was asked to go to college, and that was Creighton University. Even there, the first year yet, it wasn't quite as easy. But all of a sudden, it was just there. For instance, when I went to college, the same in high school, I could pass every true and false test. I could pass every multiple choice because the words were already there. But it was difficult when I had to write the answers myself, come up with it myself.
Yeah.
Because that's when I had to know what I'm saying. I could do it if I could take it home and do it as a homework. Because then I could take my time. But when you have to write a test or give an answer, you have to know it immediately. And then you have to search for your words first.
Yeah. You'd done your high school work in Germany.
I did. Well, Germany had a different system. We had 7 years of school, and then 3 regular, and then we had 3 years of vocational school. It was not really so much equivalent of a high school, because in a vocational school, you work 4 days and go to school 1 day. And you do the work that you wanted, whether it's a nurse or whether it's a plumber or whether it's an electrician. So it was different than here. If they wanted me to have college after that, I had to have the high school here as the basis.
Okay, so you did high school work here, then you did college work.
Yeah.
And where was that?
The high school work I had at our headquarters, our mother house in Milwaukee. That was ours. And so our sisters operated the high school there. And then when that was completed, I went to Creighton University to get my college, and that was in pharmacy.
You had a Bachelor of Science degree there in pharmacy from Creighton University in Omaha in 1960.
Right.
That was kind of difficult in a way because, as you've already said, the writing questions and all.
The first year, but I got to where I actually, by the last few years in college, I did better with writing my answers because I always knew the answers. It was a little more difficult with multiple choices, because I gotten to the point where what true for, well, it's true here in this instance, but it's not quite true here. So I began to debating, was it true or was it false? I knew it too well then.
I was going to say that you knew too much.
That's true.
So you graduated from Creighton, and then you went to Roswell, New Mexico.
Right.
And what did you do there?
I operated the pharmacy, did the purchasing for the hospital. It was about a 150-bed hospital at that time. I did a little of everything, but mostly had to set up the pharmacy.
You set it up from scratch, started it from the very beginning.
Yeah. There's a new hospital that they had just built. It was a year old. They had a beautiful pharmacy with all the places to send all these bottles. But they were never indexed. They were still up on the floors. Every nursing station had a few drawers of bottles of medicine. Then when I came, wanted to set it up in the pharmacy, I had to bring in all this medicine back from all these nursing stations and index it and set it up.
Working on that for 8 years, this really became yours, didn't it?
It was definitely mine. I had it set up so well. I also did the purchasing, so at that time I had to deal with all the pharmaceutical representatives, also the medical supplies. I bought all those, and so I liked it quite well. I could have stayed there all right. It was kind of just the way I had wanted it. But I was smart enough to know, well, if I could stay here all this time and things would not change at all, I'm happy doing that, but things don't stay the same,
How did it come about that you moved on and you went to St. Louis?
Well, our superior that they had, he was the leader of all the sisters in the U.S. She came down one time. She told me that she would like me to take hospital administration degree. I thought about it. She gave me a little time to think about it for the night, and then I said the same thing there. I didn't know much about that either. I just said the sisters that were at the time in hospital administration, they were all nurses. Or for that matter, you could be pharmacists, but then they went right into being a nurse, and the next day you'd be an administrator. And they had no formal education as an administrator. So at least I could go to school and get my education in hospital administration. And that I got at St. Louis University.
Well, you'd been impressing them by being an administrator over that pharmacy, so they thought, well, we can take that talent and expand it on it. You were there for 2 years then. So then you come here to Tulsa in 1970.
Yeah, right. I was then the assistant to our sister that was, at that time we called them administrators. So I was an assistant administrator. There were actually 2 others here, assistant administrator. There were 3 of us.
So that was a good assignment. Was that one that you said, yeah, I want that. That's good for me. I want to go there.
I liked it here. In New Mexico, if I missed anything in New Mexico was it is so dry and so hot in summer. In Tulsa, at least, there were winters and there was a spring, and it wasn't always summer all the time. It was a little bit nicer up here in Tulsa. It reminded me a little bit more of Germany than New Mexico did.
Well, we certainly had more trees and hills and so forth here.
It was green at least.
Right. Yeah, you were fortunate you were sent to the best part of the state.
That's right.
A little bit about St. John then. What were the facilities like in 70 and 72 when you came here as an assistant?
When I came here, they were discussing tax-exempt financing in place to build a new hospital.
In 70 and 72,
yes.
You're assistant.
Yeah, we had a 600-bed hospital. It was always full. However, many of the facilities were 50 years old at that time. Exactly 50. We dedicated the first hospital in 26.
And maybe at this point we could say that this corner where we are right now, 21st and Utica, was purchased August 29th of 1916 for $16,000. This was actually a truck farm where we are.
A strawberry patch. We have pictures. A number of people are there picking strawberries. That was actually farmland here. And the city was north of here.
It had been purchased then by the Sisters of the Sorrowful Mother in 1916. moving ourselves ahead then.
So 45 years later then, they decided that they really needed a new hospital, rebuild it, because when the original hospital was built, it was small rooms. They had a sink in there, they had running water, but no other facilities, no bathrooms, no showers. They were all common. And the patients at that time had to go out in the hall for everything, except maybe to wash their face or wash their hands.
They have air conditioning?
No air conditioning, no, absolutely no air conditioning. So in the 45-year period, they added one little wing, and it was almost like a cross or an X. So they had one wing, and then from there on, they kept adding on every 5 to 10 years another building and building more buildings. The last building that was built in 56 is the only wing over here, the red brick building, that still stands. Everything else was part of the old hospital, what we call the old hospital. Some of them were built in 38, but the intent was to demolish all that and just build new, rather than we have added on and added on. It wasn't efficient anymore, and so the decision was built new. Then we got an architect, and we began to have meetings and talk about building a new hospital. So 2 years I was here, that was more or less our job, along with operating the old hospital, to design the new hospital and get the tax-exempt financing in place. We had to have the money to build the new hospital because there wasn't any cash, so to speak. We just kind of operated from the money came in, the money went out. There wasn't a lot of savings or anything. We had to borrow every penny that we needed. So the $40 million was the main hospital, which now, if you look out there, it's the tower, the patient tower. We moved all the patients over to the new hospital. And then they started demolishing what was left, with the exception of this one wing that was built in 56. That was not connected anymore. So that's when we then had to build another building. They connected that, what was left from the former buildings, with the new hospital. Then we got the plaza as an entrance.
All that happened in 74 when you came back as a CEO?
When I came back as a CEO, we had designed the new hospital, but it took the architects 2 years practically to do the detail work, so it could be given to a construction company, because they can't build it unless all the details have been designed. So actually, I left, and that's what the work was done. So when I came back 2 years later in 74, at that time, they were just breaking the ground for the tower.
Okay, so you were in on the beginnings of that. Then you went 2 years of grooming as a CEO of Roswell, New Mexico. Mm-hmm. And in 74, I suppose you were real comfortable, and you thought you could stay there, too, for a while, right?
I would have stayed there, right?
But no, that was not to happen. So then they brought you back, and that must have been a good thing for you to think, well, I get to come back to Tulsa, and I know that area.
First, when I was here, it was very hard for me to go back to New Mexico. But then, once I was there a few years, thinking after the fact now, that was the best thing could have happened to me, because I was it, I was the administrator. And I had to make the decision. There was nobody to ask, nobody around to ask. It's quite different if you're the assistant and there's an administrator. You're not responsible ultimately, So it was quite different. It was good because it did me a lot of good to have to do that. So when I was asked to come back 2 years later, I kind of liked it now in New Mexico. I started many things. We were growing and we were developing things. I had a lot of ideas I wanted to do, so I had to come back here then. It was hard too then, I didn't want to leave there. But I was grateful afterwards that I was taken out of here and went down here because I had learned a lot to be alone out there.
The thought God's ways are not man's ways come into play here, don't they? Mm-hmm. We don't always know, do we?
I must always say, even though I didn't always like it at first, afterwards I always saw it for the best.
Why don't we continue on the building here, because as you came back, the hospital was in the midst of about a $44 million building of the North Tower, and I am told was built without any interference or inconvenience to the function of the hospital. Building went on and patient care continued on, so that was good planning that had gone into all that.
Yeah, we started from scratch. The campus was very tight where the hospital was, so we had to build a new hospital by itself, close to it but away from the present one, not connected at first. We connected it then when it was functioning as a new hospital, independent hospital then.
The North Tower was dedicated February 22nd of 76, and then you had the capacity of 603 beds. You probably thought then, well, we're done building. We don't need to do any more building.
Well, we knew that we had to connect this wing. See, the remaining building was this one with the 5 floors and 125 beds. And we had to build this connecting wing to connect what was left with the new hospital. But we had no money left for that because we used everything up for the new tower. So that's when we had to do our fund drive. We did, at that time, raise about $8 million. By the time it was finished, we continued with our fund drive. It was about a $12 million project, and we finished it 2 years later. Actually, that was dedicated in 79.
By that time, funding was easier. You had established the reputation of the hospital. Some names here. Ray Siegfried was very involved in raising money, millions of dollars. Is that true?
Well, actually, he did that already when the sisters built the first hospital.
But then there were other people. I suppose that goes back to then W.K. Warren Sr.?
Yes. He gave a lot of money to this one building here.
This is the brick one you're pointing to?
Yeah.
And W.G. Skelly?
Yeah. They then did that in 56 when we kept adding on to the old hospital, one wing after the other.
Why don't we continue talking about building here? This would be a good point to do that. And Richard, if you'll come in here, let's pick up after this North Tower that we've talked about for $44 million, 603 beds. Then what were the other buildings? Let's talk it out.
To be absolutely accurate, it wasn't 44 million so much. I think ultimately we had only 40 million, and maybe the 4 million was for the financing and the costs of it all.
I see.
But it was 44 million, that we needed.
So then what was the next big building program?
The very first one after that was we had to start with some physician buildings. At that time, the hospital did not own any physician building. There was a physician building on the corner of Utica in 19. Their building was built at the same time when the hospital was built, but it was built by doctors. Actually, the doctors owned most of that. The hospital did not own that. But the physicians wanted to get out of there by their time, so the hospital acquired their building. This was the first doctor's building. And then right next to it, what we now call the Kaiser building, about 50 offices. That was then the one we really built, was the Kaiser building. And they were both connected to the hospital with an overhead bridge. Then it's almost like every 5 years there comes another building project, So then somebody talked some people in, we needing a health club. So that's when we built our health club, the Siegfried Health Club.
And that's inside the Mary Chapman Health Plaza, which is its own building connected to the Kaiser building.
The property that we owned was this square. It was from Utica to Wheeling and from 21st to 19th Street. This was our St. John's block. Most everything outside that, we didn't really own yet. We had to acquire one house after the other, one building after the other. And all days along 19th Street all became part of the hospital. And then we started on Wheeling. That actually we enlarged our campus across 19th Street and also across Wheeling Street, all the way down to St. But the property had to be purchased each time. The most important thing was that we didn't really have much parking. And so every time we built the building, we had to also build a big parking garage along with it, because all of a sudden we didn't only take care of the people that came to visit their relatives, but we also all of a sudden had doctors, and they had office staff. So for every doctor that you have to have enough parking, not just for a doctor, for their staff, and so many parking places for their patients. You couldn't just build a doctor's building without building the parking and get even approval without doing that. So to every one of our buildings, there's a parking garage attached to it that goes further down to 17th Street. The health plaza started out as a little health club, and then we needed very badly some meeting rooms. We had nothing, so to speak, when we had meetings, etc. So we added that. Before we were finished, we started out with a 2-story health club. We kept adding more floors to it. It became a 5-story building instead of a 2-story building. Every building we built was always full. Within a year it was full, Then you already begin talking about, we need that. So it continued. There was not that many years in between. Then 19th Street was completely filled up with buildings. So we had to go down to Wheeling, and that's when we got to Wheeling, and that building we called the Burnson Building, and the Burnson Parking Garage, which practically took all of Wheeling. It was pretty big. This was actually a building twice as large as some of the others, but we wanted to build one building, have enough property there for the next building. Before we finished the building, we needed already more. This is a very interesting way things change. The doctors were not part of the hospital. They were further away all over them. But all of a sudden, they came closer to the hospital. They want to be closer to the hospital. If you look at it now, what we're doing, what's happening in our days, the physicians are moving out. There's a number of groups that were intended to move in our last physician building. By the time we finished it, they decided they would not move in there anymore, and they wanted to go out south, out east.
Specialty hospitals you're talking about today,
yeah.
Right?
Healthcare keeps changing, It forces us to change along with it. It's almost like, if you want to stay in it, you have to change along with it, whatever the trend is at the time. Healthcare does change, brought about by a number of factors, mostly by the payers and insurance company. It's changing again, because the new healthcare bill that has just been passed this year will bring a lot of changes.
I'm going to get into that in a minute. So about the building then, between the two of you, does that bring us to where we are today?
Not quite.
Okay, what else?
Had the first building that was the doctor's building at 19th and Utica, now called the Holloman Building.
Yes.
Then the Kravis Building was called the Physicians Building. It's now Kaiser. And then the Mary Chapman Health Plaza next to it. I might add that each one of these buildings was going to be Sister's last building. You could build one, and that's going to take care of our needs. And then all of a sudden it would fill up, and another building would be needed. Then came the Birdson Building on Wheeling, and the large parkade connected to it. And then all of a sudden we were out of space, parking, and medical space in the hospital, which led to a campus expansion, probably in 1989,
this is
1990.
the last expansion. This took us 10 years now. That was our last. That was all the way down on 21st Street. See, we moved over from the 19th Street, and then we had this property on 21st, which has always been intended to be a hospital expansion.
Very interesting project to build a hospital expansion down Utica, right next to the street. And then on the east side, build a large parking garage connected to it. And then further down, build another doctor tower called the Williams Medical Plaza. This was all built without interrupting a lot of traffic. That was our expansion back about 10 years ago, back in the early 90s.
Well, we just finished it not long ago.
Yeah.
We needed parking. We couldn't really build a building here without having some parking somewhere. And so it was my idea, let's connect it on the west side to the hospital And then the parking is also connected to this new building. And on the east side, where we put the physician buildings on the corner of Wheeling and 21st, the parking garage would also connect to that and made the multi-story garage so that we have 7 floors which connect to both buildings. If you drive up there, you can enter the hospital on most floors, and then also the physician building on most floors, which at first some didn't like it because it was a little bit confusing for people to get up there. But I haven't heard that much anymore the last year or two.
And John, the whole campus is interconnected by either air bridge or tunnel. If you had the energy, you could start over in the Williams building and walk your way to the corner of 21st and Utica up to 19th and back over to the Health Plaza indoors, either by air bridge or tunnel. So it's a very sophisticated connection of all the property here.
Here we're sitting in 2010. Are there plans? Could you expand any more, or is this it for what you have here now?
Yeah, but see what then we had to begin, because this last project we did on 21st Street, we really did it for one purpose, not for more patients or for more beds. The most important thing we needed to change our semi-private rooms to private rooms. But then in the meantime we bought this building, which is across Utica, see.
The Robert Davis Tower, the bank tower.
Because what happened in the hospital, it's not only patient rooms. We began to acquire, as medical technology developed, all this sophisticated technology in buildings, 5 hot catheterization labs, 2 or 3 linear accelerator, and then 2 or 3 MRIs, and they all needed big space to operate. So all of our clinical services were growing because of technology, not because of patients. It was the technology that made that grow. And so in order to have room for that, the only thing we could do is move all the administrative services out of the building. So we have no administration left practically over in the tower, except nursing itself. In some of the clinical services there, whatever administration they need. Everything else, I don't know what we would have done if we wouldn't have been able to acquire this building here, where we are right now. For a long time we called it Utica Tower, and now we call it Davis Tower, because as you may remember, the Utica building and the bank went into receivership, and Mr. Davies, who owned the F&M Bank, acquired the accounts. The government had it, and he acquired the accounts. But he did not want to have the building because their headquarters was out on Horwich somewhere. So he asked me one time, did you need a building? I said, well, sure they do for the right price. And we had talked about it because their building was for sale. It changed ownership. At last it was owned by somebody out in Denver. So we said, let us just wait. In another few years, we probably, instead of $14 million, which they wanted then, well, we finally acquired it for $8.
Really?
This is the former Utica National Bank Tower.
Yeah.
This office I'm sitting here was the bank president's office.
Yeah.
And all the furniture is here too.
Sister showed her skills in negotiation on the purchase of the tower.
You were a negotiator in the price.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So we have a tertiary hospital here. You know, the city keeps growing out south over these last 50 years. And now it's growing east. It's growing in all directions, even north. All of a sudden, we became an inner city hospital. And the patients are all moving out, out, the outlying areas. So then we said, now we have to have some feeder hospitals. So Barbara Hospital was the first one, but this was owned by a group of physicians. And Dr. Porter at one time called and said, we would like to have St. John's operate our hospital.
That was Bartlett Memorial Hospital in Sapulpa.
And he was really getting old. There were 5 brothers. They all had passed away, and he was the last one. And he died within 2 years after we finally took it over. So we took that over. And then we went over to St. Philip's in Borisville. Just smaller hospitals. The trend was, you have to connect up to someone else. We needed them they needed us. St. Philip's is a not-for-profit hospital. We put some money in, I would say about 35 million.
Sponsorship, mainly.
We took over sponsorship.
In Bartlesville. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, in other words, in the not-for-profit system, you can't really say ownership so much. You say sponsorship. Because we sponsor the hospital, we are stewards of the hospital, but the assets are not at our disposal to just sell it and take the money, Everything always has to stay within the corporation. It has to be plowed back into the corporation. We had Portland Hospital. Now we had St. Philip's Hospital. And then there was a group of private investors. They were decided they're going to build a hospital in Owassa. And then they came to us and said, would you manage it? We're going to build it, would you manage it? And we said, well, if anybody builds a hospital in Owassa, yes, we would manage it because, hey, this is our referral source. We can't let somebody else have that hospital out here. We felt that the South was growing, and we were locked out of the South. To this day, there are so many hospitals out South now with St. Francis and all these other for-profit hospitals. We cannot depend on people coming from South Tulsa or further out there. So we need to kind of capture the North and East. And so then we said, yes, we would, we sponsored it. Before it was all finished, we then decided that as soon as it was built, we acquired it. It was a for-profit hospital. It was built as a for-profit hospital under the corporation. We had a lot of input into it, and then almost a year and a half after we occupied it, we then took out a tax-exempt financing and acquired the hospital in Owassa. We barely had it finished, open 1 year. We started in Broken Arrow. See, Broken Arrow was another one that as long as no hospital was in Broken Arrow, all the Tulsa hospital got a certain number of referrals, it's just wherever the patients wanted to go, they came. But once you build a new hospital in Broken Arrow, then you pretty much lock out a lot of the others. And so we said, well, we had always intended that we have to grow east, so we can't really let everybody else be having Broken Arrow, because we do depend on Broken Arrow as a feeder. This was then our goals, that we would acquire the west, the north, and the east, and stay out of the south, because we cannot move south. Thank God, the city is growing east now.
John, each of the four communities had expressed a very strong interest in an affiliation with St. John, and I'm talking Sapulpa, Bartlesville, Owassa. We'd been talking to city manager Rodney Ray for 20 years about having a St. John presence in Owassa. That was part of our motivation up there. Then the same thing has happened in Broken Arrow. The city fathers have asked us to come in there 5-6 years ago, and we are about to open a brand new hospital there in September of 2010.
There's actually a private, a for-profit group that is building the hospital. It is our intent, probably shortly after the first of the year, we're getting ready. We need to do another tax-exempt financing to get the funds where we acquire the Broken Arrow Hospital. But that is the last.
Did we hear her say the last?
That's her final building, right. But let me add, John, that during all of this development, we have built our own primary care physician group called the Omni Medical Group. We've developed a presence in most of the outlying communities with clinics. Sand Springs, Sapulpa, Broken Arrow, 81st Memorial, large property there with lab and x-ray and Omni Medical Clinic. So we have a doctor presence in and surrounding Tulsa in all the smaller suburban communities.
Broken Arrow is one of the fastest growing communities we have in Oklahoma. So it's possible there could be more building of facilities in Broken Arrow.
They're actually St. Francis South is right on the border of Broken Arrow and Tulsa, and St. Francis intended it to be their Broken Arrow Hospital. But the citizens of Broken Arrow said, we want our own hospital. They just made the uproar. They consider St. Francis South a Tulsa hospital. That's not our own. So they wanted their own hospital. It didn't matter who built it. And so this private group St. Francis wanted it, so did Hillcrest, so did St. John's, and so did this private group. We finally signed the contract with this private group, the same group that had built Owasso, and we had the relationship with them, so it was all the way understood that someday we will acquire it after it is finished.
The hospital is located adjacent to the Broken Arrow Expressway, a little bit west of some major development there with the Bass Pro and all of that. And there's some acreage on the hospital grounds where some hotels will go up and probably some retail operations. So it's going to be a large consumer property there when it's all completed.
What has happened in the meantime is that just the brick and mortar we're talking about. But in the meantime, like Richard had already alluded to, that we have a large primary care physician group. But now, because all these for-profit hospitals that got built out south, the one where the City of Faith was, they took over their building. That's the surgical hospital now. First, they were a specialty hospital just for one, like the spine hospital, and the other one was an orthopedic hospital. The government frowned on this, just a specialty hospital. So as soon as they got wind of that, they opened up their medical staff to all specialists. So now they're becoming two surgical hospitals. A lot of our surgeons have bought ownership in them now. So we're losing a lot of patients from here to these hospitals in the south. In other words, I believe we need no more brick and mortar because many of our physicians are owning part of the hospital somewhere else. What we need now, we had to start employing our own specialists. We had the primary care, but we didn't have the neurosurgeons, they left and went out there. The urology surgeons, they went out and joined the surgery hospital out on 71st and Lewis. One group after the other is leaving and they use it as other hospitals. So every time another group leaves, which is just happening right while we talk, there's an oncology group. They are groundbreaking for their own hospital. So we face, what are we going to do for oncology? We need oncology here. And so the next group will be orthopedic. The general surgeons are still with us, and they have not invested anywhere else, and orthopedic has invested anywhere else. But it was the intent of our orthopedic group that they're going to be an investor in our Broken Arrow Hospital. But the government had just passed a regulation or law, whatever it is, in March, prohibits that. So we're having to deal with that right now because we have, of course, orthopedic group, they're very disappointed. We checked it out with a number of different firms, legal counsel and attorney groups that analyzing the law and just say, no, it's just prohibited. No matter how you do it, you just can't do it right now. But we have to really work hard and come up with some other ideas to keep them satisfied that they don't leave us either, too, because they have a big presence here. We have about 24 orthopedic surgeons in that one group. We depend on them, in other words. There's never such a thing. You just do this and then you can sit back and just enjoy it.
No.
Because there's so much going on around you. And with the competition that you have to be always on your toes and see who is going to take something away from you next.
Can you put a number on the building here at 21st and Utica? Because in 1916 they bought the land for $16,000. So today, what do we have here in terms of dollars invested in this corner?
When you just talk about dollars, we would have to look at all of our assets. I would say all the assets that we own is about over $1 billion.
We said billion, didn't we?
Billion. Mm-hmm.
You probably will not accept a lot of accolades, but all this happened while you were CEO here. Mm. And you gave a real steady hand to this facility.
I have learned in my earliest few years, when I had to go back to Roswell, when you needed to do things, there was no money. I came here, there was no money, You start borrowing. You had an older hospital that had to be replaced, but there was no cash to replace it. You had to just borrow the money. You got the hospital, but then you always at the same time have to pay back the big loan that you had. So while we were building every 5 to 10 years another building, we also had financing every 5 to 10 years for sometimes, or refinancing. We were very conservative because I have always had this as my goal. The only way I can have peace and can operate this place, I have to have at least enough money in the bank so I don't have to worry about where the next paycheck comes for all these employees we all of a sudden have. Over 7,000 now. They grew along too. It takes a lot of money for every 2 weeks to pay all of them. But for instance, when I went to Roswell, we were waiting for a check every Friday. And if it was late, you were sitting on pins and needles. Where are we going to get the money from? And so by the time I left down there, we had the money. We had extra money. So that was my first goal. You gotta have enough money to at least not having to spend all your energy on worrying. Part of it is now too, we have all these buildings. We have a lot of debt too that we have to pay back. But at the same time, we have to watch very carefully that we don't use up all the cash, that we have a certain amount of cash, because it takes a lot. So how it will be in the future, we did it this far, and now when I turn it over, come January 1st to someone else, I can only say that I leave and turn it over in much better condition than I had to take it 8 years ago. Cash goes fast, as you know. It goes even faster nowadays when you have to acquire physician practices. We have about 250 employed physicians now. Well, their compensation is a lot higher than the rest of the hospital's compensation is. And all their employees along with it. With every physician, you have to count about that they have 3 or 4 employees. So, you have 250 physicians, so we have at least 1,000 other employees.
I wanted to address just briefly, we talk about all this has happened under your leadership. But when you first came here, there was a point, I think you had to establish yourself as you're in charge, because at least back then, it was a man's world, mostly men that were CEOs. I believe you came in with an administration degree, and the person who you succeeded did not have that training.
As I said earlier, all the administrators, we call them, or you would say the CEOs of all our hospitals, would probably have been nurses.
Yeah.
Because at that time, when I went to get my degree in pharmacy, there were only 4 pharmacists in previous years that had a degree. The rest of them was also operated by nurses. All the sisters had nursing degree, and then gradually they learned something else along with it. But not all nurses are administrators. So sister that was here, she was an excellent nurse. They had a nursing school where she came from. But it wasn't the same as being a hospital administrator. So as this thing became more complex and bigger, she depended totally on lay people, to help her. So when I came in, the physicians, probably the rest of the hospital, they were dependent on our assistant lay administrators. Comparing us, there was Hillcrest close to us, but they only had lay administration. An interesting thing was that I had 2 associate administrators. When I was here as an assistant administrator, we had 2 associate administrators, which is supposed to be a step higher. They have been here a little longer, 2 years ahead of me. We had them, so the physicians, when they needed something, they just go to the associate administrators. They didn't really look at sister as being the business administrator. So then when I came, I replaced Sister Edith, and so all of a sudden they started comparing not me, but they started comparing Mr. Harvey with Mr. Blanchard and Mr. Rogers. These were the associate administrator. And they somehow didn't come up to their expectation. So that's when I said to our chief of staff there, because he came one time and he told me that's the way they look at it. And I said, well, you can tell them that if they want to compare anybody here to Mr. Jim Harvey, they have to compare me with them and not Mr. Rogers, Mr. Blanchard. I said, yeah, but they consider you just a figurehead, I mean, the spiritual leader or something. And I said, no, I either be the administrator or I'm not here. You have to decide one or the other, but I'm not here as a figurehead. And so you can tell them that they have their choice. If they want somebody with Mr. Blanchard here, then I just find me something else, you know. And so that's when he actually did tell them that, and then decided, well, if that's the way it is, they would rather keep me, you know. So,
So how long a period of time do you think it took you to really establish yourself as the CEO of this hospital?
I always felt when I came here, well, I could go to Roswell with a smaller hospital of 150 beds. And in 2 years, I felt very comfortable there, and I was moving the hospital forward, moving my direction, that I could see I had an influence on the way it was operating. But it was smaller, and it was always my feeling that when you come to a place like St. John's, big like it is, I felt that when I was here 5 years, I could move this place. Before that, we did many things. We finished this hospital. I straightened out things that needed to be changed, that everybody was upset. And it was more like putting out fires, so to speak. But then, as long as you're just putting out fires, you never move the hospital. But after 5 years, I felt I could move the people that were following me, that I could really lead them and not just be here and putting out fires and getting things straightened out.
Well, you did an outstanding job of leading, because look where we are today in the building that we've just talked about. Why did they change the name from St. John's to St. John?
This was really our sisters, our leadership in our community who felt, why are we calling it St. John's? It seems like it belongs to St. John's the Apostle. It doesn't really belong to him. It has a name, St. John. But when you say St. John's, means it belongs to him, and it doesn't, so we call it St. John.
So you plan to step aside as of January 1st, 2011. Is that going to be difficult for you to do that?
No.
And then what will you be doing? You will remain as president of the Marian Health System?
I will remain as president of the Marian Health System. I devote some time to it now, and maybe have a little more time to devote to that, because I don't just work 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week now. I work many jobs. I just needed to give up some of the work so that I could have a little bit more time for my spiritual life. I have always felt, and still feel strongly, that my prayer life and spiritual life always has to come first, and everything else has to be second. After all, that was my main thing. I wanted to be religious first, and then I got all these other jobs. So I have to always keep in mind that no matter how busy you are and how much pressure there is on everything, you spend the first so many hours of the day with God, and that gives you the strength to all the rest of the day. So hopefully I have more time to do that.
But you were going to perhaps visit more with staff and patients and that type of thing?
We had established a pastoral care department, which none of the hospitals had when I first came, because the sisters were administrators of their floors. So while the sister was doing the work as administering nursing portion, or at least supervising it, they also did the spiritual care work. But we separated that out. They didn't have enough sisters anymore. We took them out and made them only do the pastoral ministry and spend the time with the patients and have others do the administrative portion. So what I want to spend time on is the employees with the staff, because all of a sudden we have 7,000 employees 7,000 employees, and they come and go. The turnover is tremendous. You have to do an awful lot of importing values, our mission integration, we call it, to work with the employees, that, hey, don't just do your work. We expect more, We always say we want every employee be the best professional, but always provide, we call it compassionate care that is mostly compassionate besides doing an excellent job, that one or the other is not doing it either. We have to have both. But it takes an awful lot to import it into employees. And the employees, whenever I meet them in the hall, I always greet them and ask them where they work, how long they have been here, and when they tell you that they don't know me and have been here 2 or 3 years, well, that really shouldn't happen, There was a time when I could spend more time with employees, when I first started. But that just isn't the time anymore. Once I started the Marian health system too, So I will have maybe more time to do that.
Maybe a word here about the volunteers, because I'm always been impressed that you have a great volunteer program here at St. John. Mm-hmm. Maybe you have a comment on that, how important that has been to the facility.
Today, it happens to be a day I spent at least 2 hours. They had a meeting upstairs, our volunteers. First they had a board meeting. I go to their board meetings monthly. So I go to their board meetings, and then they had luncheon afterwards. I joined them for lunch, and then they had their planning committee meeting for the new fiscal year. It's very important that I be there. If I'm not there, they feel like it's not the same. They want to make sure that I understand and know how hard they work and how dedicated they are. And so everybody needs to be not just wanted, but appreciated, and let them know how much they do for you. They actually had to get the commitment for them today, because we working on a Da Vinci robot, which cost about $2 million. And they will fund it, so this will be their project the next.
Tell us, a Da Vinci robot, what will it perform?
Well, you know what a robot is.
Yes.
Yeah. And as a surgery robot, the Army developed that when they had the Desert Storm operation. When soldiers get wounded and needed medical care or surgery, they can actually do it right there, but the experts being maybe in Germany or whatever they were at that time, or even in the United States. We have what you call the surgery where nowadays they don't have to cut so much. They do laparoscopic surgery. But this is still different because the physician doesn't have to be in the same room, It can be in a different building, or for that matter in a different country, and oversee that. I don't even know, it's a kind of a mystery how that works, because your hands are in there, but the patient isn't really there. And it is more precise, less invasive.
So the volunteers, that's a project for them, and they raise money for that? $2 million.
Yep. They just finished a $2 million pledge.
Wow.
That was for mammography equipment.
It's very, very successful gift shop in the hospital. They pledged $2 million for different projects, and most recently paid off $2 million toward digital mammography. And then here are renewing their pledge toward a new robot.
And they're very proud of that,
They sure are.
So they have been after me for the last 6 months. We need a project. I said, well, we're doing budgeting right now, so just give me a little time and see what we need the most. But it has to be something that they can identify with.
Mm-hmm. Down through the years, there have been many hundreds, thousands, I suppose, of volunteers. And because their fundraising projects are mostly the gift shop, or sometimes they have Christmas gifts of books or jewelry or some clothing. But most of their contribution is work. They worked all throughout the hospital. They just basically work 2-3 half days a week, or 3-4 days a week, some of them, and some one day. But they do a lot of little jobs that we don't have to have employees to do. So every one of our departments always wants an auxiliary. Well, as you look back over your life, and we think about how you struggled with the call as a 20-year-old, 21-year-old, and here today you're 79 years old. There was a master plan for you that really worked out. And so maybe based on that theme, there's a little message or advice to students who will listen to this. What would you say to them?
When I grew up, I could never have visualized that it was possible that I could ever get to that. When I go home and see my brothers and sisters now, my classmates and people I knew, I think to myself, wow, just think if I wouldn't have done that, I would just do what they do at home. I wouldn't have had the opportunity. I only can say that every one of my sisters at home could have done the same thing had they the opportunity. I wasn't any smarter than they were. It's just that I was given the opportunity. My biggest joy, it's not the buildings, no. It's the people I work with and the people, employees and the auxiliaries, even physicians, the influence you have on other people. I'd like to be with people and enjoy being with people. And if I regret anything at all these last few years, I've just been too busy. I just hadn't had time for the things I really enjoy doing, But maybe after January 1st, I can do more of that. I'm grateful for the opportunity that our community has given me. I'm also always say I'm grateful not only God, of course, has given me first the opportunity that our community has at least given me the education before they put me in the job, the experience. For instance, before I went to pharmacy, there was a year internship along with it. Before I started hospital administration, before I even could graduate, it was a year training in the hospital. Just being there, just to learn and not having any responsibility other than that.
It's something to say about a person such as you that for all these years you've been here as a CEO, it's not easy to make all these tough decisions. And not everybody, I suppose, was happy because that's the way life is. To come out of all that with as much respect and love for you as there is to be commendable. And I'm sure there'll be many words said about you between now and August and the end of the year. But let me be the first to say that that's the way you are held in our community in high esteem, and I congratulate you for that.
I think the one reputation that I leave is our physicians always said, "Oh, sister is tough. She doesn't always give us everything, but she's fair." And I think that the employees need to always say the same thing. You can always say yes to things, but you have to be able to explain and not give one employee one thing and the other one is here just as long and works just as hard. As long as they feel that you have done the best you can and you have been fair with them, they will understand. I have never really had any problems that I upset a lot of physicians. I couldn't say that, or they were cross with me. I have always gotten along with them, but I've always tried to be fair with them, The same thing with employees. As many times I have to just say, well, I'm sorry, I can't give you that. If I do it for you, I have to do it for everybody else. And I cannot make an exception just for you, I often say, I probably observe the policy more than anyone else does because people forget what the policy says. And they think I should make an exception to something. When I first came here, policies were written somewhere. And I read them, and I tried to make decisions according to the policy, and I constantly upset people. And I said, this is what the policy says. I didn't do anything else. And so I finally realized I'm the only one that really looks at the policies and operates according to policy, while everybody else just kind of likes to do what they want to do. So all of our directors and administrators said, okay, we're going to have a meeting every week for about 2 hours, and we take the policies, And we go through one after the other until we get into the entire policy book. If you tell me that it isn't working anymore, that it isn't fair, that we need to change it, we will change it as a group. But once we change it, you will observe them. So we went through all that, and after that we had no more trouble. You can't be liked by everybody, but maybe at least, hopefully, people don't curse me.
Well, you've given advice there to youngsters who will listen to this for many, many years to come, and I just thank you for donating so much of your time to this. This was very, very impressive, and I thank you very much.
Well, it's also very nice of you to sit here and listen to that and work with that.
Terribly fascinating. Believe me, no problem on my part. Thank you, sister. It was nice of you.